creating amazing podcast interviews on today's episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Social Pilot, the social media and marketing tool for bloggers and small businesses. Join over 20,000 social media pros at servenomaster.com/socialpilot today.
Are you tired of dealing with your boss? Do you feel underpaid and underappreciated? If you want to make it online, fire your boss and start living your retirement dreams now, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to Serve No Master Podcast, where you'll learn how to open new revenue streams and make money while you sleep. Presented live from a tropical island in the South Pacific by best-selling author Jonathan Green. Now, here's your host.
I've been doing recordings online for nearly a decade now, using every different software tool you can imagine, doing webinars, interviews, calls, and I've encountered so many different technological problems, and it can really be a nightmare. You spend an hour recording your greatest performance ever, and then you discover that the recording is broken. There are several different ways that your recordings can go bad, and they've all happened to me. When you're recording with a guest, I've done a webinar where I record on my end, and then the guest's voice never gets selected. You don't check one little box, and it only records one voice or the other. I've done that multiple times. It's the worst. Or you can make a very common mistake where it records on the other end, or the software that's recording crashes in the middle and you lose everything. These have all happened to me. And it's such an overwhelming nightmare. And the last thing you want to do is seem unprofessional. This is why it could be so tempting to want to record in person with a tape recorder, because then at least you know you're not going to lose it. At least it's a physical thing. So recording someone online can be a little bit daunting because all these mistakes, errors, and complications, they're pretty common. I've done recordings where I've recorded two different ways. The guest has recorded, I've recorded, and both have gotten corrupted. Now, technology has gotten better over the last few years. Most of these problems happened 3 or 4 years ago, but you still want to be as prepared as possible. There are problems that can happen that are operator error, and that's the real danger. A really common one is you connect with someone, they've got an amazing microphone in front of their face, but they clicked the wrong setting or the software defaulted back and it's recording through the laptop microphone. This has happened to me multiple times in multiple different ways. So this isn't really an uncommon error. This isn't really a big surprise. And it's not always the person's fault because sometimes it's the software automatically defaulting without them noticing. And so this little mistake, this little thing you didn't even notice could destroy the quality of the recording. And this has happened to me when I'm recording by myself. It happened to me when I'm recording with a guest. All these things can be overwhelming. And the standard way to deal with this right now is to send your guest a big checklist of the steps to take. And in fact, when I've appeared on other podcasts, they've sent me checklists in the past saying, you got to do this, 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 and this. Make sure all these things are set up. And it kind of gives your guest a lot of things to do. And that can be okay if your guest is low and they want to appear on your show. So if your guest has a smaller audience than you, but if your guest is someone larger audience than you, you're trying to grow your audience, or they're at the same level than you, they're going to find it annoying, especially if they've been in other shows, they don't have to do those things. So these can be really stressful. And even worse are issues if you're doing a video podcast with lighting and with background noise. You have to deal with all these other issues. Background noise is basically the bane of my existence. I'm constantly at war with the background noise of my life. There's always a noise from somewhere around me, whether it's the dog or one of the kids or someone outside or a motorcycle driving by. It's very hard to be in a place of absolute silence. It's very hard to create that environment no matter what you do. The outside world will always exist unless you have an entirely soundproof apartment or an entirely soundproof room in your house, which is very hard to make. It can be difficult to get that perfect silence. And all your guest has to do is forget one little thing, like to turn off the water machine or the refrigerator, or the phone rings in the background, and you have a problem in your recording. You have to deal with all this stuff. So how can you deal with these problems these days? And what's great is that there's been some shifts in technology. There are a couple of cool new tools coming out that make things a lot easier. So I want to walk you through 3 different ways of recording. Now, the way that I record right now, I use Skype and I use a special program called Call Recorder. And what this program does that's really great is it records when you set it right. You have to set it up right. It will record 2 different channels. It will record me in one channel and the guest in another. Now, the problem with this software, and the reason I'm looking to make a change, I'm looking to test out some new things, and I want to share these with you as I experiment new directions, is that if there's any delay, if there's any artifacting or problem with the signal from the guest coming to me that will be stored in the recording. Other programs, what you really want, the ideal solution is something that records on each person's system. So it records their computer and stores it, and records on my computer and stores it, and then merges them. And that's kind of where some new technology is going. And that's what's really exciting right now. It's a shift in the market, and it's kind of technology catching up with the need of what presenters really need. There have been some attempts in the past to make software for podcasters that have really tanked. And for that reason, I haven't really shifted. But in the last 6 months, two really cool tools have come out that are very interesting. One is called Cast and one is called Zencaster. And they're very similar in what they do. They're very similar in pricing. And I'll be doing some experimenting with them over the coming months. But I want to share them with you now because they're very interesting. And what they do is you log in and the guest logs in, and it takes the guest through and makes sure the guest has the right microphone activated, all those little steps. And so it's integrated into the login process. And when each person speaks, it records them separately. So I get recorded on my computer, the guest gets reported on their computer. If there's a third guest, they get reported on their computer, and then they all get merged together in the website. See, when you have your guest record their own channel, oftentimes I have to have the guest send me their audio file, send me their recording, and then I have to sync them up, which takes a really long time. Matching up two audio files has to be perfect. If one audio file is out of sync by half a second, it's very noticeable in the final product. And all of these little problems are something that can hold people back from podcasting. A lot of people feel overwhelmed by the challenge of podcasting or the challenges of dealing with the software. And so I just want to share with you that I'm really excited about some of these changes, and that now getting into interviewing doesn't have to be as scary as it used to be. You don't have to worry about these technical hurdles. And they each have free trials, so you can kind of check them out and get started. And in my experience, the technical fear is one of the first really overwhelming fears that people face when they're thinking about getting into podcasting. Think about it as a performance. And as someone who's DJ'd around the world, I've had a lot of experiences where major software problems or major hardware problems have really kicked me in the teeth. I've had experiences where the power went out to the tools I was using. I've had experiences where the computers crashed, where the computers died forever, where there's smoke coming out of the computer. All these things can happen, and they're really scary. The great thing about using an integral solution, something that's in between you and the guest, is that these things can't happen. So you have your local backups, your remote backups, and these tools are only getting more powerful. And I think there's going to be a strong shift over the next few years into these directions, and these tools will continue to get more and more refined. And it's something that makes me pretty excited about looking towards the future of podcasting. You know that I'm not heavily into interviews with my podcasting. And part of that is I love kind of sharing my message with you, but I will be definitely recording more interviews in the future. I have an interview coming up next week that I'm very excited about with one of the largest podcasters in the world. I've been thinking a lot about ways to bring you more and exciting information. And there are a couple of things that hold me back personally from doing a lot of interviews. And one of them is time logistics. It's hard to schedule a time. This interview I have next week, we actually scheduled it 3 weeks ago. I had to deal with his assistant. It's on the calendar. It's a whole thing. I don't really like doing that. I hate having a really hard line fixed schedule. But with a tool that's like, it handles all the steps, it makes it a lot easier. I hate having to send someone a calendar thing and then have to send them a separate thing about the Skype invitation. I have to send them a separate reminder. It makes it really, really complicated. And then you have to send them the list of instructions to make sure they don't mess up the recording by using the wrong microphone. Or I've had people use a really bad phone connection on an interview before and it sounds terrible. All of these problems become bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's just extra stress that you don't want. So the ability to control more and more of the process and the ability to work with a really tight solution, that gets me excited. That's something I'm interested in. And I think that as I test out both these tools, and I'm going to try out Cast and Zencaster, and eventually I'll update the post about this to tell you which one I like more. But I've just been researching over the last week, thinking about some changes, and I discovered one and then I discovered the other. So I'm very interested in seeing where things can go forward. If they can make it easy for me, kind of remove all of the hassle. I hate sending people a list of instructions. Say, oh, make sure you do this, make sure you have headphones on, make sure to do this. If the software can kind of handle all that and make sure I get a good recording, then I'm excited about it. Now, obviously, I don't want to test this stuff using a real guest. That's the other thing. It's like, do you really want to put all your eggs in one basket? I've seen people do this before. I saw people in the past when Google Hangouts first came out and a couple of other different webinar products first came out, they started doing live events. And their first time using the software was at a big sales event. And I just couldn't believe it because that's so dangerous. You never want to try something new when it's really important, when it's live. So when you're testing these tools, if you decide to give them a try them out with a friend or try them out with not a real guest. You don't want to try a tool, discover it's not for you. That's the reason that I don't use Google Hangouts, is that I've had a couple of experiences that were really bad with it. Now the software is probably great now. It's been a couple of years since then. But when you try something once and it doesn't work, it really burns out your impression of that tool. I really think that it's kind of a great time to move into podcasting. I'm really excited about where podcasting is going, because podcasting is really growing as a market. It's really growing with how many people are listening to podcasts. The numbers are up across the board. And it's a really wide opportunity right now to enter the market. And that's the reason that software and technology is now adapting. For a long time, there weren't very many good options for recording for podcasts. Most of the tools out there, it was kind of a secondary feature. It wasn't something really serious. But now that the market is so strong, the technology is finally catching up. People are finally realizing, wait, everyone does listen to podcasts. Maybe we should make technology for that. So over the coming year, expect to see a lot more really, really cool developments and really exciting things coming out. And I think that you're going to be very excited with where this market goes. And this is really just a great opportunity. So if you've ever thought about doing recordings, whether it's for podcasts or for anything else, I really recommend checking out these new tools. And I'm just excited about the direction that things are going in right now. And these are a couple of really great ways you can record amazing live interviews for your next podcast.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Serve No Master. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss another episode. We'll be back tomorrow with more tips and tactics on how to escape that rat race. Head over to servenomaster.com/podcasts now for your chance to win a free copy of Jonathan's bestseller, Serve No Master. All you have to do is leave a 5-star review of this podcast. See you tomorrow.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Serve No Master podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode.